Good morning, everyone. My name is Desi Gonzalez, and I work at the Andy Warhol Museum as the manager of digital engagement. Can you guys hear me all right? I am a native English speaker, so if I'm going too fast, make some sort of gesture or something like that, and I can slow down. But it's been really great to be here at We Are Museums, and something I've been thinking about after the first day is the theme we see right here on the poster, POW, We Empower Museums. Listening to talks yesterday, the word empower really resonated with me. It was much more than just empowering museums, however. You know, this conference is empowering us as museums, staff members, that we can go back and empower at our museums. But there are also instances where we're empowering audiences in different ways. And at the Andy Warhol Museum, we've recently undertaken a number of initiatives to make the museum more accessible to visitors with disabilities. Today I'm going to be focusing my talk on one part of all of those accessibility initiatives, our inclusive audio guide, which empowers our visitors who are blind or have low vision to have an independent museum experience. So the Warhol is located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we're the global keeper of Andy Warhol's legacy. And in case you were wondering, that's where Pittsburgh is in the US. We're about a 6-hour drive away from New York City, a 4-hour drive away from Washington, D.C. And we're kind of at the crossroads between the East Coast and the Midwest. Warhol was actually born in Pittsburgh in 1928, when it was really a kind of gritty industrial town. And he was born to a poor immigrant family there. He grew up there and even went to college in Pittsburgh before he moved to New York, where he made his name. One other exciting thing I want to mention about Pittsburgh is that as the Warhol, we're a part of a consortium of 4 museums called the Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh that includes a Museum of Art, the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, and the Carnegie Science Center. So we're the smallest of those 4 museums, but we have the most international reach. So our museum is the largest single artist museum in the United States, and we hold the most comprehensive collection of Warhol artworks, and as well as all of Warhol's archives at our museums. And our collection really represents the span of his life, from his birth to his death and his legacy afterwards. And in our 7th-story building, we devote 4 floors to the pop artist's life. We show art and ephemera, alongside ephemera, and we tell his story chronologically from the top to the bottom. Here's an image of our archives, so showing kind of the breadth of the kind of works we have, or kind of objects we have in our collection. And one of the great things about working at the Warhol is that we get to work with his spirit in mind. Our museum is a very unconventional kind of experience. It is experimental, it is playful, and we translate that to the visitor experience as well. This is an example of our Silver Clouds installation. It's a Warhol artwork, but it's something you can immerse yourself in, and you can play with these kind of puffy, cloud-like, pillow-like silver objects. You can also go to our museum and sit for a screen test video portrait in one of our gallery interactives. You can try your hand at silkscreen, like Warhol's silkscreen process, down in our factory studio. These are different ways that we kind of craft a different kind of museum experience. And when it comes to kind of my work in digital engagement, I look to Warhol and the ways that he experimented with the new media of his time. We know Warhol mostly for kind of these works that you see on the left, these silkscreen pop artworks. And in the 1960s, he was the first artist to adopt the silkscreen, the photographic silkscreen process to use in fine art. So that's one way that kind of he was experimenting with new media, all the way to the 1980s. He passed away in 1987, and towards the end of his life, he was experimenting with personal computing. This is kind of from our archives, examples of the Commodore Amiga 1000 computer. He was invited by the Commodore Amiga folks to kind of do some of the first digital art. So kind of with that in mind, the way that Warhol experimented with art, we use that to rethink the audio guide. The audio guide I think of as kind of that original quintessential museum technology. It's been around forever. I think some people are kind of sick of audio guides, right? But we reimagined what it might be for today. And as a result, we built Out Loud, which is the Warhol's inclusive audio guide. And as I'll explain in this talk, it's inclusive because it's available to all visitors, but it's designed specifically with visitors with disability in mind, across disabilities. And in particular, we designed it in conjunction with the Pittsburgh community members who are blind or have low vision. So I'm going to rewind for a second back to January 2016 when this whole project started. I was about 2 months into the job at the Warhol, and I was told that we had this kind of big accessibility grant. We had some funding to do accessibility initiatives, and a small fraction of it, we were going to use it to build an audio experience for visitors to the museum who are blind, have low vision. So we didn't have an audio guide at all at that point. So it seemed like a really great opportunity to build something that would be available to all visitors. I think one of the kind of requests we get the most at the front desk at our museum is, do we have an audio guide, any sort of interpretive material like that for you to accompany your visit? So I saw this as an opportunity to start from scratch, building it inclusively from the ground up. But we also knew that this was a big challenge ahead of us. We are a pretty small staff at the museum. We're a staff of about 30 full-time members, but only me in digital. I'm a department of one, and therefore I wear many hats. And doing mobile applications, building them from scratch is not something that I necessarily do. We had a small budget for this project as far as digital goes. We had about $30,000 to work on the audio guide. And this was brand new territory for us. We had worked with visitors with visual impairments before, but really only for kind of guided tours in the museum. We were thinking about how do we craft an experience that's kind of an independent museum experience using technology in the museum. We had never done mobile accessibility. We were only at this point just starting to think even about web accessibility. How do you make a website compatible for visitors or users who have visual impairments and other disabilities? So this was a steep learning curve for us. We had a lot to learn in a short amount of time, and we were also supposed to do this in about 7 months. So with that in mind, starting from scratch, we decided we needed a really kind of tight approach in order to actually make this happen and do it in the best way possible that actually serves our audience needs. So we decided to start with the experts, the users themselves. These community members who have visual impairments. And we took on kind of 3 different approaches that I think really work together in parallel. I'm going to dive into what these are, but these were the key to our success. Agile methodology. I'm going to dive in actually specifically into design thinking, but Agile methodology is this idea of we didn't start with, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to build this app exactly like this in mind, and then we build it, and then we put it out there. But rather, we are iterating on what we do, on our process. That we started out not knowing what the end result was going to be. We tested it, and we were totally willing to scrap designs along the way, and let the kind of the process guide us as we went along. Relatedly, design thinking. We had some speakers talk about, several people mentioned design thinking yesterday, and I'll dive into that. And then co-design, this kind of co-design process, also closely related to design thinking and user-centered design, right, is working with the users themselves to come up with the project, or come up with the design. I really do think this was a co-design process in Out Loud. We worked super closely with actually I like to call them user experts, sort of, right? They're both users and experts at the same time. By being kind of the target audience group, of course they're the experts. And then design thinking, this process that's sort of become really popularized and spread across the world, used by businesses, used in universities. This idea that we start from a place of empathy or understanding. Doing user research to inform the ideas we come up with, then prototyping something, testing, and going on with that. These are two different diagrams that kind of explain the process. I actually prefer the one on the bottom to the top. This is the track that we're on right now, is the empathetic museum, but I actually don't love the word empathy. Especially when thinking about audiences with disabilities. I think it can be kind of problematic to think that you might be able to fully be in the shoes of someone who has a disability when their experiences are actually very different from how someone, for example, my experiences as a sighted person are going to be very different from someone who is blind in the world. So I kind of like this chart more at the bottom, where we start with understanding and attempting to understand the users that we're designing for. This chart actually at the bottom is a photograph from a museum. The Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts has a maker lounge where they have visitors come in and test their hand at the design thinking process. And so I took this photograph there of how they've described the process. Does that all make sense? Good? So we started from this place of design thinking. This is kind of a graph that's showing you our timeline for the project, these 7 months that we worked on it. And I've, some of these fields match up to what we saw before. Understand is what we called the research phase. Oops, did I do that? We have this research phase. Then our design phase and content and technical development. I'll just keep talking if that's okay. But in the chart you saw, if you took a brief glimpse, we had these arrows that go along. And we punctuated this whole phase with different moments of testing, about once a month or maybe once every month and a half. That research phase only kind of lasted a month or 2 months on that chart there, but I actually like to think of that bar extending all the way across, because user research is something we kept on doing. As we were testing, we're learning more from our users and using that to inform what we would continue building and how we would, whether we were fix the app, scrap something, say, yes, this is the right direction. That informed everything. Great. So I mentioned kind of our co-design, how we were co-designing with our user experts. This is the other people we worked with also on the project. I always love when I put up this slide, people always take pictures of it too, because I think it's super important to reveal who you work with on projects. And building a team, for me, choosing the right team was really important to getting this project done. We worked with people both inside and outside of the museum. Of course, we were working with our user experts outside of the museum. We compensated all of them, paid them for their time working on this. And so those are some of our outside folks. We also had consultants that might be, you might think of them as experts, right? Prime Access Consulting they authored all of our, I'm going to explain this a little bit more later, but all of our audio content designed for accessibility. But they also did kind of really provided a lot of support in the technical development side of things. What are best practices for developing an accessible app? Tactile Reproductions LLC, you'll also see in a little bit the tactile reproductions that we have in our museum that accompany the audio guide, so I'll get into that later. But on our core team, it was really just 4 people working on the app. I kind of served as the project manager and kind of user experience lead. We had 2 people from our education department. One who really knows the content well at the Warhol and the stories that we're trying to tell about Warhol. And then someone else who is skilled with working with communities with disabilities. And then finally we had a mobile developer on board. And I mentioned earlier that we're part of this consortium of 4 museums. This was an instance where that consortium, being a part of 4 museums really benefited us. We ended up, I mentioned that we didn't have a huge technology budget, so we worked kind of in-house and out-of-house at the same time for the technical development on the app, working with the innovation studio of the Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh. That's their logo right down there. So we had 1 mobile developer from there. And what that meant for us was that we could work with someone at a reduced rate, but at the same time, they really cared about museums. They really cared about seeing this app through. They're there when I can call up my colleague Ruben whenever I feel like there's a bug, and he'll fix it right away and push out a new build. I think we were lucky in that case. But I guess I'm showing you this because there is a lot of work that gets put into these projects. Oh, I also forgot to mention the advisory team. This was stakeholders across the museum who we would meet with almost as regularly as we do user testing, and sometimes we'd invite them to these user testing sessions. And it was really great to have them understand what was going on in the project at all stages, what it takes to develop something like this, what it means to work with users. Our director of development, for example, who does fundraising, which might not be a concept that you guys have so much here in Europe, like really intensively fundraising, but she was able to be a part of this process and then be able to report out to our funders about, she really knew what the development took in this process. So actually, can we play the video now? I'd like to play 2 minutes, about 2 minutes of a video to give you a sense of the project, and then I'm going to dive into the different features.
Drawing with synthetic dye features a fashionable, lithe woman in a puffy knee-length dress standing in front of a 1950s convertible sports car. If you start once again at the woman's feet, follow her legs, and then the left-hand edge of the skirt, you will soon discover the car's rear bumper.
Out Loud is the Warhol's new inclusive audio guide. We've been designing Out Loud with an inclusive design process in mind. So we're designing an app that will be available to visitors of all abilities, but we've had a particular focus on visitors who are blind or have low vision.
This is Warhol's early childhood. Maybe we could do the near me function and see which one we want to try out.
My name is Ann Lapidus, and I have been working on the Out Loud app since its very conception. I gave a lot of feedback on the app about how I thought that I would be a patron of the museum. So I was telling the team that I think that I would probably be coming in with friends or family to the museum, so that I wanted to make sure that the app was sort of seamless, and that I could also be able to engage with the app and also be able to engage with the friends and family that I came with.
This is a photograph of my grandmother Julia, as well as Andy when he was about 2 years old, and my father when he was about 5. And this is a professional...
When you think about a visual art museum, you don't necessarily think about a blind person coming into this venue. But the great thing about this app and what the Warhol is doing is that it's breaking down the barriers. And that's what's really so innovative about this project, is that it's making it so that blind people are able to come into the museum and be engaged and fully participatory in their own experience.
All right, so I wanted to point out a few things that we just saw in that video and give you a little bit more context around them. The very first thing we saw in this video, this image right here, I mentioned really briefly that we have these tactile reproductions. This is another one of our accessibility initiatives that we've integrated into our audio guide. And these are kind of reliefs, raised line reliefs that are created using a CNC mill, a computer numerically controlled mill, right? And they're reproductions of iconic Warhol works. We rolled out a few so far on 2 floors of our museums. It's about 3 on each floor, and we'll be rolling them out for each floor. And through the sense of touch, you can get an understanding of what a Warhol work, the composition of a Warhol work, different formal elements. And so on our audio guide, the very first thing you heard was a narration that's guiding you through that experience of feeling that work. And so we have on the app both content for accessibility and then content that's more of traditional educational interpretive, what you might think of an audio guide, and we're weaving both of those together. So something like this is content designed for accessibility. We also have in-depth descriptions of artworks. All artworks that are featured on the audio guide have this visual description so that someone like Anne can listen to that first before then diving into the educational content. We what we saw at the very end of the video, which was Anne kind of scrolling through the app, she's using a feature called VoiceOver that's available on iOS, on Apple products. And VoiceOver is a screen reader. It is interpreting what sighted people see visually on a screen into speech. So it's something I've learned a lot about lately, is screen readers, but it's a really powerful tool that's actually built into, for example, all Apple products. Apple's done a very good job at building for accessibility and building tools that are super usable, that for a lot of our users that we've worked with have really been a game changer and allowed them to access the internet, access their phone, message friends in new ways. And finally, you don't totally see this on the app, but or in the video rather. You saw it at one point when Anne is walking in the galleries with her friend. They're talking about trying the Near Me functionality, and that is how we're delivering content out to visitors with visual impairments in the museum. We're using Bluetooth low energy beacons that send a signal to the app, and then it'll ping you when you're close to certain works. So Anne, for example, would get, it would say something like, there are now 2 works near you, and then tell her what works they are. So she can use her screen reader, VoiceOver, and select that. So those are just some of the features. That's kind of an introduction to how Out Loud works and how it's accessible. I want to go into, I've kind of framed this talking about our design thinking process, and from all the user research we've done, we developed a set of 5 principles. These design principles would be things that we would really carry through, almost values that we held while designing the app and making sure that we wanted to achieve. So I'm going to go in a little bit further depth into these features, what the app does, but start from this kind of the point of view of design principles, right? And what is the principle, and then what did that actually mean when we built it? So these are learnings from our co-designers, but they're also things that we felt could be, we learned so much from them that actually could be applicable to all visitors across abilities, not just visitors who have visual impairments. This is my favorite design principle, the very first one actually. Providing a path with a choice. This was actually, someone said the line, path with a choice. And it really resonated with us. So Anne, for example, she told us she wanted to be independent during her museum visit. She specifically said, I have this in my notes from when we did research, I don't want to feel like I'm being babysat when I go to a museum. But then we had other users that we worked with. One man, Brian, he was recently blind, and he felt kind of self-conscious in museum spaces. He was concerned about safety to the artwork, that he might run into something. So we were really interested in how can we provide guidance in the museum while allowing kind of a personalized, independent experience. So for us, what this looked like is actually kind of core to the audio guide. I mentioned that we integrated both interpretive and accessible content. I think there are a few museums that have done these kind of visual description tours, verbal description tours that have these in-depth descriptions of artworks geared towards audiences with visual impairments, but they're often siloed away from other educational content. And we, from the beginning, knew we wanted to combine it. That it wasn't about you taking your tour because you're blind, and then you take a regular tour because you're sighted, but rather the visual description became a way into the educational content for visitors with visual impairments. We split up our audio, because of that, we split up our audio into these kind of shorter, modular stops, little chunks of audio content, and you can see that right here in the screenshot in my very big iPhone right here. So this is all about pop products in Warhol's work. This is a Campbell's Soup painting that we have in our galleries, and we split it, we have a short introduction, we have something that talks about this particular torn label, we have something about an archival piece of audio of one of his friends discussing when she first heard about Warhol doing his Campbell's Soup cans. We have, a piece talking about how Warhol went from abstract expressionism into pop, and the visual description all there. And we hope that this allows visitors to guide their own journey and decide what to play along the way. And relatedly to that, what we're doing here is offering a mix of voices and tones. This is something that kind of all museum educators probably know, but we all come to the museum with different perspectives and tastes, and therefore we're all going to have and want different experiences. So Anne, for example, is really into history and social issues, and another user expert of ours, he's really into the art and the process because he has an art background himself. He was a costume designer. So they also told us that they really wanted to hear human-sounding voices. They wanted a variety of voices. A lot of the people we talked to listen to podcasts. They're really sophisticated consumers of audio, so they also expected good audio content. So for us, that meant we have these different types of audio content on there, from archival audio content to things about the process to things about the time period, and that we interviewed staff across the museum, not just curators, but also our director of publications, an educator, a gallery attendant, and included that on our audio guide. We are able to, because we have that kind of modular audio, we are able to reorder them based on user interests. If someone is always listening to archival audio, we can push that higher up in the queue. Or if you turn on VoiceOver, the screen reader, the visual description will actually go right under the introduction at the beginning of the queue. And we make this assumption that if you're using the feature for accessibility, that you're interested in accessible content. And one kind of last thing about the podcast, we made sure that we were using this conversational tone that was super friendly, and that it wasn't scripted. The third is kind of obvious, but building it as a social experience, especially in our museum space, which is really playful. Everyone we talked to said they come to the museum with a companion. Gabe, one of our user experts, said he couldn't actually remember coming to the museum alone even before he lost his vision, that he really sees the museum as a social place. And they wanted to hold conversations in the galleries. So for us, we did a number of things. We developed audio that sparks discussion, and we provide things like headphone splitters so that two people can use the same kind of audio guide and then have two different sets of headphones and listen to it together. Our fourth design principle, and this one really is super important for building something for visitors with disabilities, is to use industry standards for the interactions that we designed in the app. I mentioned that there are already really powerful tools there for users with disabilities, like Apple. They've pioneered things like VoiceOver and other tools that are super, really game changers for these audiences. And some of the people we were working with were power users. They could use VoiceOver faster than you could use your own app. And then others were just learning how to use it, brand new to it, taking classes at the local library to learn how to use VoiceOver. But either way, we felt like we need to really stick to these industry standards for how to build an accessible audio guide. They also encouraged us to find inspiration in the apps that they use every day. And that's something that we did. These are actually two examples. They're a little hard to see, but of some apps that we look to as inspiration. This is National Public Radio's NPR One app, which I love and listen to all the time. We really love the simplified audio controls, and that's something that we went for in our final design. This is the podcast app that just comes with your iPhone. But there's certain things we were told, like, when I open an app, Anne was saying, when I open an app for the first time, I always go to the top left corner for the back button. For audio controls, I'd expect them to be all in a row. In the middle, the play button in the middle of the screen. And these sort of things were kind of obvious, and then in the end we realized that it was something we had to adhere to, right? We're also doing things like providing transcripts for visitors who might be deaf or have a hearing impairment, and kind of incorporating other standards to accommodate other disabilities in the guide. And then for our final design principle, it was keep visitor interactions to a minimum. This is another one that's really more specific to this particular audience that we're working with. We had co-designers like Anne. You saw that Anne was walking with her service dog, right, and a service dog in one hand, the leash, she was holding onto it, and then her friend's arm in the other hand. The other user experts who use canes to navigate the space. So for us, we wanted to build something that could really be easily used with just one hand, right? We also recognize the importance of sound when navigating space for this particular audience group. So for us, what this looked like, I mentioned that we use low energy Bluetooth beacons to tell you when an artwork is nearby that has audio content associated. You get this really unobtrusive notification. We never played audio content automatically. We rather let that be a choice that someone makes to dive in further and not kind of start clouding that audio landscape. And then something really obvious, this right here, this blue thing is a lanyard. You see someone wearing it around her neck. This is so obvious, like little details, but became super important for this audience group, right? Have something that you can wear the audio guide and go kind of hands-free when you're walking around and maybe listening to an audio stop. So I want to go back to this quote from Anne, that's something she said in the video. When you think about a visual art museum, you don't necessarily think about a blind person coming into the venue. And I really loved when she said that. I thought it was really interesting, and that it's kind of true that for years, decades, centuries maybe, museums have not really considered this as an audience group that we're reaching out to, or that we consider as part of of who we accept in that space. But our goal at the Warhol is ultimately to flip this notion on its head. And I hope that as we continue to develop out loud and continue to put it out there, that the Warhol is seen as this place where that someone like Anne, who's blind, can come in and have a fully independent experience. So, one of the biggest learnings for me with this project is this, that if we design for inclusion, we can actually create a better experience for all. And I'd like to end it with a quote from Warhol. He said that pop art is for everyone. I don't think art should be only for the select few. I think it should be for the mass of American people, or maybe European people, or people all over the world, right? But he was really interested in making an art form that reached people in a really broad way. And I think in that way, something like Out Loud that is opening the museum and opening pop art to more audiences is in keeping with that. Thank you.